That's the brain. And then the wow. That's the spinal cord. So any other thing coming out from here at least you know your C1 to C7, T1 to T12 and stuff like that. Thank you. So those ones represent the peripheral nervous system. And then coming from, so generally we have what? All the nerves coming from the brain supplying all the structures in the head region will be described as the cranial nerves. All the nerves coming out from the spinal cord, down from C level to the sacral coccygeal, especially the sacral, nerves come out from there supplying structures in the thoracic cavity, in the cervical region, thoracic cavity, abdominal, and then the pelvic region. They are all spinal nerves. So peripheral nervous system will be divided into those spinal nerves and then the cranial nerves. So they are made up of spinal and cranial nerves. And then whether cranial or spinal, they may be supplying, each of these can supply internal structures, which of course we refer to as what? Visceral. They may also supply external structures, which we commonly refer to as a skeletal muscle. The same goes for this, visceral, skeletal, which means spinal nerves can supply internal organs, and those ones are called sympathetic and parasympathetic. The same way goes for this, sympathetic, so, and this one is called somatic. Likewise, skeletal muscles called somatic. So skeletal muscles of the head region will be supplied will be controlled by the cranial nerves. Visceral organs like the eyes, the tongue, the salivary gland controlled by the cranial nerves will come under visceral. So, which means basically peripheral nervous system is divided into this parasympathetic stuff are called autonomic, while the skeletal muscle on both sides will be called somatic, which means we will be looking at this module. We'll be looking at autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system, whereby autonomic represents sympathetic and parasympathetic, and then skeletal muscle represents somatosensory and somatomotor. When we talk about somatosensory, we're talking about how it enters into so if this is a skeletal muscle, for example, we're going to have the one that takes information and then the one that takes information out. So this one will be somatosensory because this is a skeletal muscle. Somatosensory, carrying the information in, and then when the information is processed, it has to come out. So this is somatosensory, this is somatomotor. When we talk about the autonomic nervous system, if this is the heart, like the one that goes in, the one that comes out forms a ganglia. So this is straightforward, preganglionic and postganglionic. So that's what we'll be looking at. So that is like this. if we take a section of the wall of the intestine, we're going to consider that in the next topic when we finish this. There are nerves, there are neurons on the wall of the GIT. And these are specialized neurons that can automatically control the activity of the intestine, even without the spinal cord, even without the brain. So those ones, they are indwelling, they are living, they are within the wall of the GIT. And we call them specialized enteric neurons. So they are there, they are inside, they are intrinsic, they are dwelling in the wall of the GIT, from the esophagus down to the rectum, the entire wall. They have special neurons which are called the intrinsic nervous system or the enteric nervous system, which can regulate the activity of the smooth muscles of the GIT, independent of the spinal nerves, independent of the brain. So they are there on their own, and physiologists will describe it as what? The brain of the GIT. So we say that the GIT has its own independent brain, in quote. It has its own central nervous system, in quote. So that those special neurons located in the wall of the GIT, which on their own control the contraction of the smooth muscle of the GIT without external influence of the brain and the spinal cord, or without external influence of the peripheral nerves. So if I use the word peripheral, you know what that means now. So without the influence of the peripheral nerves are called the enteric nervous system. So why do we have to include it here? Because the wall of the GIT is made up of what? Smooth muscle. And the GIT qualifies as what? A visceral organ. Therefore, we have to put it here. All right? You have to include it in that definition. When we use the word sympathetic, we need to know what are they. That word sympathetic, in terms of the anatomy, the origin is very important. So we define sympathetic nerve by what? Two major criteria. One is origin, and two is what? Function. So by origin, sympathetic nerves are those that come from T1 to L2. So if this is the spinal cord from T1, so this would have been C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, and C7 as the case in the dog, then we have T1. Then all the nerves coming out from here, this is T2, T3, up to L2. All of those nerves are sympathetic. So by location or by anatomical landmarks, sympathetic nerves are those spinal nerves. Spinal nerves, right? Spinal nerves emerging from T1 to L2. And when nerves come out from the spinal cord, which foramen do they pass through?
Intervertebral.
Good. So they pass through the intervertebral foramen and then come out as what? As the dorsal route. We are going to see that shortly. So that is the location. Then in terms of function, sympathetic nerves function to modulate or to regulate the activity of visceral organs, antagonistically to parasympathetic nerves. So you are not going to say there is no parasympathetic. No. So we need to define what are they. So if we have the cranial nerves, 12 in number, and then we have these ones. So we have S1 and we have S4. We have T1 and we have L2 up to L5. We have C1, C8, C7 as the case may be. So all those ones coming out from here up to this point are sympathetic nerves. Then we have 4 nerves out of the 12 pairs. You have 3, you have 7, you have 9, and you have 10. These 4 cranial nerves are parasympathetic in function. Another nerve that comes out from between S2 and S3 is the pelvic nerve. And this one is also parasympathetic. So how many parasympathetic nerves do we have in the body?
5.
5. This one is called oculomotor. This one is called facial. This one is called glossopharyngeal. And this one is called vagus. So these are the 4 cranial nerves that are parasympathetic in function. The pelvic nerve supplies the pelvic region where you find the reproductive tracts and tract organs and then the bladder. While these ones from T1 to T2, they supply all the visceral organs in the thoracic cavity, in the, yep.
Sorry, the pelvic nerve, does it come in between the S1, S3, or does it come from a specific?
Between S2, S3.
S2.
Yeah, basically S2, S3. So, now you can see it here. The spinal cord is going to look like this. This one is yet to function. Let's take the one that classroom gave us. So this one that looks like the butterfly, the wings of the butterfly, is called the gray matter. So this is inside the gray matter and then the white matter. So now, when spinal nerves come out, we are looking at this side. It comes out like this to the same organ. And from the same organ, another one goes in. Are you seeing it now? That's how it works. Then when it goes in, there is going to be what? A synapse. It can come like this. This is what you call a monosynaptic arrangement. You can see only one synapse. Then in some types of connections, you might also have what you call a polysynaptic. It's more than one, right? So it can be like this. So this is what? This one that sends information in is called what? The sensory fiber. The one that produces the information that produces the effect on the organ is called the motor fiber. You can also call it the afferent for sensory. So this is called afferent or sensory. This is called efferent or motor. So now that is what we are seeing here. This is the organ. The organ is somewhere here. It runs through the gray matter. The gray matter is divided into horns. Can you see this one? This look like horn, right? The butterfly. So this is the dorsal horn. This is the ventral horn. This is the lateral horn. And this is the intermediolateral horn. Does that make sense? So the gray matter is important that we don't look at it as a gray matter holistically. It's important we look at them separately in terms of fiber tracts. So sensory fiber. Can sensory fiber be found in the ventral horn? of the spinal cord, of the gray matter? No. Sensory fibers enter the gray matter of the spinal cord through the dorsal horn. Through the dorsal horn. So this is where you find the sensory fibers. Then the ventral fiber, the motor fibers, or what you call the efferent fibers, are found where? In the ventral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. Then these are called what? Interneurons. Interneurons are usually found either in the lateral or in the interbilateral horn of the spinal cord. Specifically, spinal cords. Remember, this is what? This is a motor neuron, right? Do you think that this motor can be somatic? Can it be somatic? Or is it always visceral? Okay, let me put it this way. Do spinal nerves supply muscles?
Yes.
Good. Do they supply visceral? Yes. So this motor fiber can be what? Both. It can be somatic and it can be visceral. So what will be the differences in their fiber tracts? Visceral. Okay, now between the word visceral and somatic, which one is applicable to the sympathetic system? Visceral. We have said that spinal nerves can be both spinal motor nerves can be both somatic and visceral. So where are they both? Are they both coming from the same portion of the gray matter? No. So the visceral portion of the motor spinal nerves, which qualify as sympathetic, come from here. So the cell bodies for the efferent fiber of the sympathetic system are basically located where? In the intermediolateral horn of the gray matter. That's the most specific classification of spinal nerves that are sympathetic. So it would be wrong for us to say that the cell bodies of the sympathetic nerves come from the ventral horn of the gray matter. Microscopic, that is neuroanatomy, will say no to that. But generally speaking, they all emerge from the ventral column, right? They all come out. But I'm talking about what? Remember the word I said, cell bodies, where their cell bodies are located. So while they all come out from this, the cell bodies for the somatic is located here. The cell bodies, remember we did neurons, right? So they are axons. Their axons can actually come out from the ventral root, but their cell bodies are located differently, within different nuclei. So when we talk about dorsal column, it's made up of what? Several nuclei. When we talk about the lateral, it has its own nuclei, which are called cell bodies. The same thing goes here, the same thing goes here. And by the time we'll be talking about tracts, that is ascending tract. Remember I mentioned it last class, right? Last semester. Ascending and descending. They will be following different pathways. Some will follow here, some will enter here. It might even cross before it goes up and all that, but we'll get to that. So let's discuss this slide. Now that you know. That's the target organ. For sympathetic, acetylcholine is released here, and norepinephrine is released here. Does that make sense? Then, but for parasympathetic, that is the target organ. Here is acetylcholine, here is also acetylcholine. Does that make sense? Let's go for our break. One afferent, two efferents. What do you mean by that? Autonomic nervous system. What do you mean by one afferent, two efferent? One afferent, two efferents. So, if this is the organ, for instance, the afferent will enter, will move this way and enter. It can form a synapse here, or it may not, depending. But remember, if we're talking about peripheral nervous system, are we going to include this? Are we going to include this? No, we can't. We say they are always outside. Is this outside the spinal cord? No. So can how many efferents are you seeing there? Right? This is a ganglia. A ganglion. Which can be what? Right? Paravertebral or prevertebral, if we're talking about the sympathetic. So the same pattern for the parasympathetic system. So we talk about what? One afferent. Can you see there's no gang? Is there any ganglia here? Sorry, this should be like this. Is there any ganglion there? No. So that's that. So sensory fibers, they run straight. The only thing they do here is there's a swelling here called the dorsal root. They form the dorsal root and then they enter the dorsal column. So this is called the sensory fiber. So there is what? This is one afferent, two efferents. So efferents are organized as what? Pre and post. But afferents, no. Afferents do not have a pre, they do not have a post. It runs straight. Don't forget that these two can be contained in one nerve bundle. Right? So if we say this is a vagus nerve, or is a glossopharyngeal nerve, or whatever nerve, both the sensory and the motor can be in the same. So in that case, that nerve will be called both sensory and motor. Some are only sensory, some are only motor, but there are also some that are both. We'll still see it. So when we say that the sympathetic system, the autonomic nervous system, because this applies to both to sympathetic and parasympathetic, the autonomic nervous system is said to be one afferent, two efferent system. So when you hear that terminology, it simply means that sensory is straight, one, and then post efferent, two. So the function of one function is to monitor the state of the cell, of the tissue, and inform and then the other one is to, after information, there has to, the central nervous system has to do something. It has to what? We are wonderful. When you get to the third semester, tell them that I love them so much. They did something last semester that's baffled me. That not really baffled me, but I was so excited, I was so happy. And we're going to repeat that semester.
Did you give them a 5 out of 5?
What?
Did you give them a 5 out of 5 as well?
Yes, of course. Yeah, they got it. So we're going to have a seminar presentation on the different endocrine systems. They did it because of their class size. They did it one person per system. So you can consult them. They can teach you. They can guide you. But they did a fantastic job. So, but for knowledge sake, you have to read by yourself, right? Use my slides. Consult some materials. Then, class rep, you divide yourself into 5. Known to produce. I said is known to produce both cortisol, both corticosteroids, mineralocorticoids, as well as norepinephrine. So if this is the adrenal gland, This is the adrenal medulla. And the adrenal medulla is made up of what? Cells. This is the cortex, and this is the medulla. You would have been told about the different zones of the cortex in your histology, right? Good. So, the cells are supplied by this fiber is a parasympathetic fiber, and this place is acetylcholine. All of these points is what? So this acetylcholine, this is now considered what? The preganglionic fiber. Why this is considered the post? So the chromaffin cells, these are called the chromaffin cells. Chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla. When the acetylcholine stimulates these cells will now produce norepinephrine. Does that make sense? This stands for NE, norepinephrine. So acetylcholine, the preganglion, remember this is now considered what? A ganglia, right? It's now a synapse between the chromaffin cells and the preganglionic fiber. So this is now considered a postganglionic fiber secreting norepinephrine. So that is how the medulla of the adrenal cortex produces norepinephrine, which is also called adrenaline. So the secretion of norepinephrine or adrenaline by the chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla is stimulated by acetylcholine.